And out of the breaking news we're following this morning, former U.S. Vice President Dick Cheney has died at the age of 84. Cheney served as vice president under George W. Bush, defense secretary under his father, George H.W. Bush, and as White House chief of staff for President Gerald Ford. A leading advocate for the invasion of Iraq, Cheney was one of the most powerful and polarizing vice presidents in American history. In his later years, he became a vocal critic of President Trump. A family spokesperson says Cheney died last night of complications of pneumonia and cardiac and vascular disease. I want to bring in CTV's U.S. political analyst Eric Ham now with more. Eric, good morning to you. A long life of public service and yet a controversial life as well. What will be Dick Cheney's legacy, do you think?
Well, so much, of course, will be discussed around his role as the architect of the global war on terror, which actually isolated the United States not only from many countries around the world, but especially its allies. And also now, when you look at the overwhelming influence and power of the executive branch and the presidency itself, much of that also will be laid at the feet of Dick Cheney, who not only ushered in one of the most powerful vice presidencies in American history, but also the executive branch and the presidency as well. And he used the 9/11 terror attack as a way to achieve and advance those aims and goals, to give unprecedented power to the presidency, which he began to use in this ongoing effort to engage in two wars, both in Iraq and Afghanistan, wars that even today are seen as a dark stain on American politics and global foreign relations.
And we didn't hear much from him after leaving office until Donald Trump arrived on the scene and reshaped the Republican Party. Tell us more about how Dick Cheney felt about Trump and this new version of the party that Cheney once held such a strong and powerful position in, part of that old Republican guard.
Yeah, I think that's also going to be a very interesting component of all of this. If you go back to his rise to power as the youngest White House chief of staff for President Gerald Ford at that time, and his rise to political power and how he shaped the Republican Party and reached its zenith during his time as vice president until Barack Obama came in as president, and how he became this central figure that was the brains, the brawn behind the power, and then this classic epic battle between himself and Donald Trump, who then ushered in the MAGA ideology of the Republican Party, so laying waste to everything that Dick Cheney had built over 3 decades. And of course, we saw not only as Donald Trump's iron grip of the party began to take hold, but as it began to do so, how Dick Cheney himself began to cede into the background as his power clearly began to wane with the rise of Donald Trump, who now wields such power, such authority, and now has even greater powers granted to him that were codified by the Supreme Court, something that Dick Cheney himself wasn't even able to do.
And it's worth noting that we haven't heard from President Trump today on the passing of Dick Cheney. We know there is some bad blood there. I think that's safe to say, between Dick Cheney, Liz Cheney, and President Trump. Eric Ham, thank you so much for that. We'll talk to you again really soon.